Welcome, folks. Thanks for joining. Bang on time. You are the early bird. So today we're talking about the EU AI Act, which is looming on us in much the same way that the GDPR did when that first came in. Lots of misconceptions about it, I think. I'm not confident it's been very well publicized. Look, I think when I talked about this earlier in the year, it was sort of the first time some people had heard about it, which is a little bit worrying because some of those people are building AI systems targeting EU customers. So hopefully we can redress that today. Let me click on that. There we go. What I want to be really clear about today, though, is I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. This is the perspective of a technologist, a perspective for other technologists. I'm thinking about this really from the perspective of the traditional Scale Factory customer base, which is predominantly people building SaaS businesses, but broader than that, people building on AWS entirely. So if you are at all uncertain about this, then please do seek real, actual legal advice. I'd like you to treat this as a kind of, I guess, a jumping off point for deeper research. But I'm hoping that today will be a useful contextualization for the Act. I've read through the whole thing. As I say, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not charging you in 6-minute increments. This is entirely free content, and hopefully my time reading that will save you some trouble and hopefully point you in the right direction so that you know what you need to be doing in relation to this Act. Should you listen to me? I'm the founder of the Scale Factory. We founded in 2009. The business was sold in November last year to 1010. Some of you may be 1010 customers existing. And we recently, as in the last week or so, we were recognized by AWS as a generative AI services competent partner, which is a recognition of our expertise, proven track record in delivering secure, responsible, and well-architected AI projects on AWS. And so we've been living in the kind of generative AI world, as many of you probably have as well, for the last year, 2 years, something like that. And this is just a badge that we get from AWS to prove that we know what we're doing in that realm. So hopefully you'll think of this as reasonably authoritative on the topic, and that you'll be prepared to treat the information I'm giving you today as trustworthy, even if you don't think I'm necessarily trustworthy, which hopefully you do as well. The other thing to say about this partner competency level is that it gets us access to AWS funding for AI related projects. So if today you come away from this thinking, oh, I probably need some help with our position as far as the EU AI Act is concerned, or maybe you're even earlier on your AI journey today and you're thinking, well, not quite sure how to get started with this in my application, or you've got something in prototype mode, you want to take it into production, any of those kind of situations, do come and talk to us. We can leverage AWS funding programs in order to get stuck in with you and help you solve some of those problems. So today we're going to be looking at why the EU AI Act matters at all, how it works, and then what you need to do and by when. So what I'm hoping is that you'll leave this webinar knowing what to do next, even if you don't know exactly how you're going to do that. The content of this webinar is based on a white paper that I put together after reading the Act. We will be in touch with a link to this white paper, as well as a recording of the webinar once we wrap up today. There are places where I'm going to glance off the details a little bit on the basis that we go into much more detail in the white paper. Once you get the white paper, it should feel familiar because the content of it is very similar to what we're covering today. So we're going to start just by getting to know you as an audience. Sorry if you thought you were just going to be able to sit here and listen. This is going to be slightly interactive. We have 3 polls for you today. I'm going to ask Danielle now to open up the first poll. Thank you, Danielle. Just to understand whether you are, as a business, based in the EU today, whether you are serving customers who are based in the EU, and whether you are using or AI features or have built AI features into your product. We'll give that just a second just to get a view on who you are, and to figure out how relevant this content is to you all as an audience. We've got half of you have responded to the poll. We'll give it another 30 seconds for everyone else to catch up. 2/3 of you. We've slowed down there. 75%. And just 10 seconds left of the poll, and then we'll end it and show you the results. Okay, let's end the poll there, Daniel, and let's have a look what the results tell us. Okay, so 78% of you are based in the EU with your business, and 89% of you are serving customers in the EU, and 72% of you are using one or more AI features in your product. Okay, good. Let's stop sharing that, Danielle. Thank you. So that's a useful kind of starting point because the people who need to care about the EU AI Act are those companies who are based in the EU or serving customers in the EU. And if you recall, when GDPR came in, the EU GDPR, before we did all of our stupid Brexit stuff, that was the same scope. It didn't matter necessarily whether you were in the EU or not, but if your customers are, you are covered in scope by that legislation. And to be clear, the AI we're talking about here is not just the trendy, cool generative AI stuff that we've been hearing a lot about recently. This is any kind of artificial intelligence. The Act itself was first written in 2021, I think, or first proposed in 21, and has evolved to incorporate generative AI once that started getting more popular. So we are talking about all artificial intelligence here, not just the large language model stuff that we're doing today. Customers using AI in this case might include, sorry, companies using AI might also include your customers. So if you are a SaaS business and you are building AI features into your application, you obviously have some obligations under that. But it is also likely to be the case that your customers in the EU who consume your application also have obligations, and you probably need to be helping them be aware of that as well. There are some special cases in the Act, particularly around military, national security, law enforcement, and public sector work. And so I'm not going to sort of dive into all of the sort of corner cases of this stuff, but do be aware that if you are in one of these sectors or you're building products for one of these sectors, then the Act, as I'm going to cover it today, may not entirely apply. There might be other obligations. For example, there are a few things that we talk about as being not permitted, which in a national security context would be permitted by the Act, if that makes sense. So if you're building these systems, you are definitely the type of organization that needs to take professional legal advice rather than listening to some beardy nerd on the internet about it. So, as I said, the Act was originally proposed in 2021 and was modified to take into account generative AI more recently. The Act itself came into force on the 1st of August last year, and other provisions of the Act come into operation in the 3 years following that. So there are already legislative controls, if you like, that apply today, and there are more that will apply in future. And I'm going to cover the main sort of dates and the main obligations, and the risks as part of this webinar. But the thing I would like you to take away today is this is already in force. This isn't sort of coming soon. These are already things that you need to be thinking about today. Why should you care? Well, the Act has been designed to prevent threats to health, safety, or fundamental human rights of EU citizens as a result of AI systems. And if you do not, as a person selling or providing use of AI to customers within the EU, if you don't follow these rules, then there are significant penalties leviable against you for non-compliance. The biggest penalty is the greater of either 35 million euros or 7% of your worldwide turnover for the previous financial year. So these are big, toothy amounts of money, similar to the GDPR fines. And so you need to be careful that you're staying on the right side of this. I can't think of any business that we've worked with in the history of the Scale Factory who'd be happy to hand over 7% of their turnover for the last financial year just because they've messed something up in terms of their legal position. So as directors or owners or founders of businesses, these responsibilities are on us, essentially. The other sort of more moral position on this, I think, is that the act is kind of intended to prevent torment nexus situations. This is my favorite tweet relative to or on the subject of what we're doing in the technology landscape, and the kind of observation that technology businesses are often quite willing to put together products or services that are actually quite dangerous and have been warned about by sci-fi since the 1960s, without really thinking about the moral, legal, or ethical implications of that. Legislation and governance make sure that these sorts of negative implications can be avoided. This is the sort of back pressure against that. Oh, this is exciting. We can do all these things. It's important in society, I think, that governments make these types of rules to keep their citizens safe from the torment nexus. The Act covers two types of system, and we're only really going to be talking about one of the types today, largely because I think people building SaaS and the customers that we work with are more likely to be building AI systems in this definition than they are general purpose AI models. So an AI system, this is text from the Act itself, so it's a bit legalese, but a machine-based system that is designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy and that may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment, and that for explicit or implicit objectives infers for the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. Now, the Act is like 30 or 40 pages of this, so you're welcome for not having to read all of it. But we're basically talking about some kind of software that uses an AI. That's the sort of general thing we're talking about here. When the Act refers to general purpose AI models, what they're really talking about are things like Claude or ChatGPT, the actual LLMs themselves. And I think for the most part, people on this call are probably not building large language models, so we're not going to cover that in detail today. But do drop me a line if you are actually building language models, or if you're fine-tuning language models for a particular use case and providing access to that, because you might be covered by the general purpose stuff in the Act. The white paper does actually have some stuff on the general purpose AI models in it. I'm just skipping over it for the purpose of brevity of this webinar. The Act itself takes a risk-based approach, which is a terminology you'd probably be familiar with if you've been through things like ISO 27001, where different risk levels are defined and different types of activity are categorized against those risk levels. But unlike ISO 27001, the risk levels and the categorization of what you're doing is defined by the Act. So you don't get to decide the risk level. The Act determines what the risk level is based on a number of criteria. So you need to work out what level of risk you are operating at today, in order to figure out what the obligations you have are. Each risk level has a set of obligations that applies to them, and we'll go into those in a bit of detail today. But as I said, the white paper contains way more detail about that. We're not going to look at general purpose AI models with systemic risk. As I say, that's probably not relevant for most of you. There's a bit about that in the white paper. So just have a sort of think about the type of work that you're doing today, using AI, and consider which risk category you think you fit in today based on the names, I suppose. Make a mental note of that, and then once I've been through the risk categorizations, we'll see whether you were correct about that risk assessment, because some of it is not intuitive, is my view. So, unacceptable risks. These systems are banned from the 2nd of February this year. So if you are building systems that do this, and the systems apply to EU residents, you need to not be doing that as far as the Act is concerned, subject to the exceptions I mentioned earlier about military and so forth. And this is the biggest set of fines. So if you are doing one of these things, as of the 2nd of February, you might see that 35 million euro or 7% turnover fine. This is a simplified list. The Act is a bit more detailed, and again, either have a read through that yourself, which has more detail, or get your lawyer to do it. But applications that are using AI to manipulate and deceive people, you cannot be running. Applications that use AI to exploit people's vulnerabilities, you cannot be using. AI-based social scoring to impact the treatment of people, no, can't be doing that either. Um, Using AI to predict the risk of someone committing a crime, you can't be doing that. Although, exception for systems that support law enforcement, that might be acceptable in some cases. If you are performing untargeted scraping of facial images and using AI to build facial recognition databases, you cannot be doing that. You also cannot use AI to infer emotions in the workplace or educational institutions, except for medical or safety reasons. You cannot use AI to categorize people based on biometric data to deduce certain protected characteristics. So you can't try and segment on sexuality or gender or race based on biometrics, and you can't use AI for real-time remote biometric identification for law enforcement purposes in publicly accessible spaces. So those two pages there. If you are doing any of those things, you really need to be seeking advice right now, because as far as the EU Act is concerned, from the 2nd of February, you should not be doing that and may be subject to fines if you are. That in a way is the one of the easy things to implement. Just stop doing the thing. The next set of risk category has a lot more obligations. We'll talk about the obligations later on. Systems that are considered to be high risk are those that are expected to pose threats to health, safety, or fundamental human rights. And if you are operating a system like this, then you have the largest number of obligations under the Act, which, as I say, we'll talk about in a second. Some of these might not seem like high risk to you, and I think this is the sort of the slightly unintuitive thing to take away. You might think the thing that you're building is perfectly fine. The Act might think of that as high risk, and I'll sort of call out a couple of examples of that where that might not be intuitive. And again, this is a sort of cut down, made easier to understand list. Annex 3 of the Act has a sort of comprehensive list of these things, and of course, you should take legal advice from a real lawyer about it if you're in this area. So things that are considered high risk AI systems. AI safety components in critical infrastructure, for example, transport, the failure of which could risk life and health. I think we could probably all agree that if we're building systems that might kill people if they fail, there is risk involved, right? And I'd hope that was part of your risk register already. AI solutions used in educational institutions that may determine access to education and the course of someone's professional life. This is a high risk system. If you are building systems that score exams, for example, a failure in that system might prevent somebody from being able to access some further education or so forth. That is considered to be high risk by the Act, and that to me feels a bit unintuitive. AI-based safety components of products, for example, AI and robot-assisted surgery. I think we could all agree that letting robots do surgery is a pretty risky thing, and you would probably be thinking about that in those terms if you're in that domain. AI tools for employment, management of workers, and access to employment. These are considered to be high risk by the Act. For example, any software that you're using to sort through CVs and categorize based on content of CVs, that might be risky. That might be a high risk use case. And that, again, for me, was a bit of a surprise. But because it has the potential to limit the access to employment of an individual, that is potentially on the fundamental human rights grounds that the EU Act is trying to prevent risk in, and so that's considered a high risk AI system. There are certain AI cases called out in the Act used to determine access to essential private and public services. So credit scoring for loan applications, evaluation for eligibility of benefits. Again, that maybe doesn't feel like a high risk thing to most people. It is considered risky by the Act. More AI high risk systems. Systems used for remote biometric identification, emotion recognition, and biometric categorization. For example, if you are using or building an AI system to look at video from inside a shop to identify shoplifters retroactively, that might be considered risky. and AI use cases in law enforcement that might interfere with people's fundamental rights. So evaluation of reliability of evidence in sort of judicial systems and so forth, risky. AI use cases in migration, asylum, and border control management, for example, automated examination of visa applications, again, risky as far as the act is concerned, and AI solutions used in the administration of justice and democratic processes. So solutions to prepare court rulings, and I guess to count votes and those sorts of things. Those could all be risky as well. So if you're building anything that sounds like it lives in that area, you might be considered to be building something that's high risk, and you therefore have a ton of obligations under the Act. We'll go into in a second. There are exceptions. Your system might not be considered high risk if it's providing or performing a narrow procedural task. So if it's not just being handed over to the AI entirely to decide on its own, and you're using something a lot more constrained, then it might well be the case that that's not a high risk scenario. If it improves the result of something that humans are already doing, again, that might not be considered to be high risk. If it detects decision-making patterns or deviations from other patterns, that might be an exception. And if it performs some kind of preparatory task for an assessment that then humans or some other process performs, again, that might not be a high-risk system. If you think that you are building a system that lives in that high-risk arena, but you believe that one of these exceptions applies, there are still obligations under the Act relating to high risk systems. It's just that you don't have to do everything that the high risk systems require, but you would need to document the decision making process that led you to understanding that this was not a high risk system and lodged that documentation with a regulatory body. So there are some things to do. The white paper covers a bit more of that. Obviously, you'll invoke your lawyers and pay them by the hour for doing this for you if you are in that sort of area. Limited risk AI systems. I'd like to think most people are building things in this sort of area, really. AI systems intended to interact directly with people, for example, chatbots, they're considered to be limited risk. AI systems that generate synthetic audio, image, video, or text content, again, limited risk. AI systems designed to recognize emotions or otherwise categorize biometric information, limited risk. AI systems that generate or manipulate deep fake images, audio, or video, limited risk. And AI systems that generate or manipulate text on matters of public interest, again, limited risk. So they're considered to be risky still, but the risks are considered to be limited. And the obligations that you have if you're building a limited risk system under the Act are fewer than if you're building a high risk system, but there are still obligations. And then minimal risk systems, the sort of everything else. The Act doesn't really define the types of systems, but you might think of AI in video games, sort of aimbots or the buddy system that's running around with you shooting at enemies. Not really going to be a consideration from a risk perspective. Spam filters are AI, and we think of those as minimal risk. And things like recommendations engines. If you're buying a big television from Amazon and Amazon subsequently suggests to you that you might like to go and buy a big television, that's stupid, but it's not risky. So you might have something like this in your system. You don't need to worry too hard about it. So having been through that list and I don't know, maybe caused a few panics, I don't know. Let's open poll two and see what risk level you think you're operating at today and whether that's surprising to you, I guess. Oh, one high risk already. Jackpot. Or commiserations, depending on how we're thinking about it. Majority, yeah, okay. Couple of high risks then. Right, we've got about 60% of people have filled that in so far. We'll give it another 30 seconds, catch up with everybody else. For the people voting, I don't know. Take a look at the white paper. There's a bit more detail in there. If it isn't clear from there, Annex 3 of the Act covers high risk systems in more detail. And of course, your lawyers will be lining up to take money off you for advice on this as well. We are just at 60 seconds, so let's close and share that poll, please, Danielle. There we go. So a couple of people working in the high risk domain. I think That's interesting. Let's maybe talk about that offline later. See if we can help you with those things. Limited risk for the most part. Again, obligations under that, so you'll be paying attention to what obligations there are, and some minimal risk as well. And 7 out of 19 that came as a surprise. So I guess that means you've learned something, because being surprised is often a signal of learning, that and pain. So hopefully that demonstrates that you've already got something out of this webinar, and that makes me very happy. So let's close that, stop sharing that, Danielle, and we'll move on. Thank you. So your obligations, that's the real question, right? Now that you've identified a risk level, what are you expected to do with that information? So everybody, anybody building AI systems at all, regardless of risk level, are obliged by the Act to ensure that all staff are sufficiently AI literate for their roles. Um, People building higher risk AI systems will need to have a higher level of literacy in their staff, obviously. And different people, different job roles will require different types of training. So your software developers will probably need a different type of training to your accounts receivable people, for example. But everybody in the organization should be brought up to a sufficient level of AI literacy. Now, helpfully, the Act doesn't define what literacy means in this context. It's not prescriptive. So in general, you should be ensuring that everyone has a general understanding of what AI is, and how it's used in your product or service. And the employees should understand the legal and ethical context of the AI that's being used, the risks inherent in the AI system, and how they can help with mitigation of those risks. And we'll see in a second that if you're building high risk systems, then there are you'll be obliged to build a risk register and think about systemic risk in that way. There are links in the white paper to a collection of resources on AI literacy. There's the EU is there's like a working group that's putting together a list of resources about how people are tackling this, but they're not being prescriptive about how you do it yourself. I had a quick look. Anthropic have a lot of pretty good content on AI risk and AI literacy, if you want to have a dig around in that. But this is for everybody essentially. I haven't covered your obligations under unacceptable risk because obviously, if you are building an unacceptable risk system and nobody voted to say that they were, well done, then you would just have to turn it off. That would probably be the step to take. But if you are building high risk systems, you have the largest set of obligations. Now, this is just one slide, and it sort of that maybe hides the amount of detail that there is in these obligations. The white paper has about 3 pages on it, so don't take the sort of brevity of this single slide as an idea that this is going to be quite straightforward. There is a lot of work to do here if you're building high risk systems. And I've sort of split them into these 6 categories. The Act doesn't do this. This is just how I've categorized it. Governance is one step, so that there's an obligation for you to build a risk management system. If you are conforming to ISO 27001, or I think 42001 is the AI related one, you will already be thinking about risk management. You'll be building a risk management system, a risk register already. You'll be obliged to build a quality management system as well to make sure that what you're building has quality built in terms of software testing, data provenance, so all that kind of stuff. You'll be obliged to build a management system for that. You'll be required to govern the data that you're using and demonstrate that it's coming from the right places, that it's being used legally, and so forth. You will need, if you're not incorporated in the EU, you will need a representative who is an EU resident to kind of broker for you, I guess, with the bodies in the countries that you're working within. And you'll need to write a declaration of conformity. So you as directors will have to sign off and say, we are following the Act, the rules of the Act. And so you as a director will need to be confident that you are following the rules of the Act. So that's a biggie, and there's a lot of paperwork involved in that. From a technical perspective, architecture, and this is something that we can really help with, because this is our bread and butter, really. Building systems to be accurate, robust, and secure, and the systems that are as resilient and robust as possible in the face of errors, and secured against unauthorized access and attack. So a lot of this is practice that we've been building over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, and we can definitely help with that if this is a concern for you. Documentation, so as well as your risk management system, which will probably involve a certain amount of procedures and processes, you'll need to write comprehensive documentation following standards that are defined in the Act. So that there are bits of the Act that cover what you should be writing in terms of documentation, showing how your systems have been designed and built, how they've been trained if you're training models, where that training data came from, how they've been tested. I've spelt that wrong in the slide. Well done me. How they're operated, how you're managing the risk on those platforms, and how they're maintained. So large amounts of documentation. If you are used to those of you who are doing sort of high risk things, if what you're doing is in the medical sphere, you might already be doing some of this stuff. If you're conforming to something like CFR 21 Part 11, a lot of these obligations look like the obligations from that, as far as writing stuff down and showing that you're doing those things is concerned. Next up, logging and audit. So keeping records of the lifetime over the lifetime of the system, showing that you are continuing to comply with the requirements of the system. If you're doing things in SOC 2 or that kind of area, this might feel familiar. There are additional logging and audit requirements for certain types of software that are called out as exceptions in the Act as well. So again, this is an area that we are pretty comprehensively competent at. We're talking about logs coming out of your system, logging the interactions you have with your large language models, for example, retaining them for as long as is required, either by the Act or by other laws and rules that you're currently following, expiring them when necessary, access controlling those logs so you can show they haven't been tampered with. All that stuff is again bread and butter for us, and we can help you through that if necessary. You also need to provide human oversight if you are doing high risk things. That oversight needs to prevent or minimize risks to health, safety, or fundamental rights. And that oversight must be appropriate to the risks that you've identified as part of your risk management process. So the things that you've called out as high risk within your high risk system are things that should have a degree of human oversight. And I think that's sort of intuitively sensible. There's also an obligation on transparency, and you'll see later that transparency is a sort of key obligation for everything else as well. If you are using AI in your system to impact how people work or receive benefits or whatever, you need to clearly inform those people how AI is used and how it will affect them. And you are obliged to report any serious incidents that is, for example, harm, disruption, infringement of rights that arise as a result of your use of AI to the relevant authority in a country that you're selling into. So the Act obliges member states of the EU to establish local bodies who are responsible for AI governance within within those borders. So you could think of that as equivalent to the ICO in the UK for information security. And if you cause harm or there is an incident related to your use of AI, you've got to report that into the local body in the same way that you would have to report to the ICO if you breached large amounts of customer data. You have less than a year to implement this. These obligations come in as of the 2nd of August next year. So if you're building a high risk system and you are not across this, you've got less than a year to get on top of it, lest you risk fines of 15 million euros or 3% of your annual worldwide turnover for the last financial year. So they're not messing around on this. A lot of what's covered here is good practice regardless of your risk level, but in the high risk level, they are obligations. Just briefly on architecture and governance. If you are on AWS or you're not on AWS and you are thinking about moving to that cloud platform, something called an AWS landing zone is probably where you want to be looking. A landing zone is a well-architected self-service multi-account environment AWS that provides governance around all sorts of stuff: security, identity, cost logging and monitoring, and so forth. We've deployed hundreds of these for customers over the years. And if you're in that high risk domain, you're looking at those obligations thinking, oh God, where do I start? If you don't have one of these, this might be a place to start. We're very glad to talk to you about how we can implement one of those for you. If you are building limited risk systems, actually, sorry, just going back a second. I think 2nd of August date. There is a 2nd of August 2027 date for certain types of high risk system, and I don't remember what they are. I put it in the white paper, but I didn't put it on this slide. I think it might be sort of healthcare related stuff, but don't quote me on that. Have a look in the white paper. But yeah, one of these you've got an extra year to worry about it. If you are building limited risk systems, you again, if you're not following these obligations, have fines to look forward to, but the obligations you have are relatively limited as well. At the point of first use of these systems by your customer, you must transparently and clearly inform them that they're using AI. So if you're using a chatbot, for example, for I don't know, university clearing is a good example because we're thinking about that at the moment. Then the people that are talking to that chatbot need to be informed that they're talking to a chatbot. It's got to be clear that they're talking to an AI. If you are generating audio, images, video, or text from an AI system, the resulting artifacts need to be labeled as things that have been generated by AI. And if you are using emotion recognition or biometric categorization, you need to inform the subjects of that system that they are being categorized in that way. And you also, of course, have the usual set of obligations to take care of that data well under the other local obligations that you have under GDPR and so forth. If you're building minimal risk, so 21% of you, well done. There are no obligations defined by the Act other than that you need to make sure that your staff are appropriately literate in AI. So that's probably the easiest one. Those of you with limited risk obligations, I think you're in for a fairly easy ride. I would test the assumption that you're a limited risk and make sure that you're not accidentally in a high risk category. But yeah, unless you're in a high risk platform, the obligations you have are relatively straightforward, I would argue. So, third and final poll, please, Danielle, if you would. Do you now know what your obligations are under the Act? And how confident are you that you can implement those? Give you a minute just to fill it out. Mm. 60% of the way there. I'll give you a few seconds for others to continue. Ten seconds left. Some of you have fallen asleep already. Didn't promise you this was going to be interesting. Okay, let's close that off then, Daniel, and share the results. Thank you. Okay, so majority of you are confident you now know what the obligations are, and many of you are confident you can integrate or implement those, which is good. A couple of people not confident. Love to hear from you afterwards in case there are things that we can do to help. Good. Thank you, Daniel. Let's close it off. All right, so wrapping up then, a reminder that this content is covered in way more detail in the white paper I wrote about a month ago. We will send you a link to this white paper as well as a copy of the recording of the webinar as well, in case you want to listen to me walk through it again. It provides a bunch more detail. There are places where I've sort of glanced over details because I know that the detail is in the white paper. And it also lays out an action plan for you to follow as well. So if you're still thinking, oh, I'm not sure where to start, that action plan will cover that off as well. Other ways in which we can help you, as I said, we're a generative AI services competency partner with AWS. If you are on AWS or thinking about migrating there, an AI best practices review is available from us. We can do a comprehensive assessment of your technical use of AI. We can have a look at your cost and performance stuff, provide you with a set of recommendations for improvement. And if you tell us that you are thinking about this in the context of the EU AI Act, we'll make sure that we incorporate recommendations pursuant to that act as well. We have a product we call AI Foundations, which is that landing zone I mentioned earlier, built in such a way as to be production ready for AI workloads. So supporting things like guardrails and so forth around the generative AI tools on AWS. If you are building AI stuff on AWS and you are not using Amazon Bedrock, that's probably worth a conversation with us because I think there are security and safety tools that you are missing out on as a result of that. And the Foundations solution integrates well with your data and model pipeline as well, and offers a high entry point for AI operational excellence, as we're calling it, which is a requirement of the Act, particularly if you're in a high risk system. If you are earlier on in your AI journey and you're thinking, well, we'd like to add AI to our product, we don't really know where to start, then we can help with that as well. We can help you have a look at what you're currently doing in your business, what data you have access to, and look at the opportunities that you have to do things with AI in your organization. We'll also take a look at the data that you have and hold, and establish how ready it is for use in that sort of AI scenario. A lot of businesses with data have it kind of higgledy-piggledy all over the place, and it sort of needs tidying up before it can be useful. We can help with that, and we give you an implementation roadmap at the end of that as well. These are all fundable projects under the AI funding program from AWS. There are other funding programs available as well, and so we'd be glad to walk you through what funding is available and what we could do to help. That's me for today. I hope this has been useful. I'd be very happy to hear from you either here in the chat or in Q&A if you have questions. Bearing in mind still that I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice. This is my perspective as a technologist who's read the Act. And if you don't have questions that you want to drop in the Zoom system here, you can get in touch with one of the methods that you can see on your screen right now, or reply to any of the emails that we send in follow-up. You will hear from probably my email address actually with the link of the to the recording and the white paper. You might also hear from folks on the sales team as well in the coming weeks. But thanks for your attention. I will hang around for questions for a little bit. Oh, I can see one's picked up there. Let me just close. Let's stop sharing my screen so that you have to look at me properly. So an anonymous attendee says, if we're based in the EU, sorry, if we're based in the UK and selling to UK customers, will the UK adopt the EU Act? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not convinced anybody in government would be able to answer that question either. The last time I looked at the state of UK legislation relative to AI, there was, and that was, I think, February, there was a motion going through the House of Lords. Lord Chris, someone or other, he used to be an Olympian, I think a blind Olympian. He had tabled a motion that the government should think about some AI legislation. That was the extent to which we'd gone with it. I also looked briefly at what the US was doing. There were about, I think I saw 160 things relating to AI kind of going through discussion, but nothing formalized yet. So the answer is I don't know. I would be surprised if anything that we bring in doesn't look at least a bit like the EU AI Act, just on the basis that the things that have been suggested to be considered in what's going through the Lords at the moment covers many of the same considerations around health, safety, and fundamental rights, and transparency and so forth. So my suspicion is that if you are not selling to EU customers today, but you're worried about UK legislation in future, and you are building something that you would consider to be higher risk, I would start going down the path of implementing some of what is in the EU Act on the basis that it will probably hit some of the same notes as whatever we do in the UK. You also might want to open up your market to the EU once you've built your products anyway. So and then you'd be obliged to do it. So yeah, in short, I don't know, but I would expect it to be similar, and I would work on that basis. Good question, yeah, thanks. Any further questions? There's either furious typing going on or nobody has a question. I'm going to give it just a moment in case we are in the former. What about human in the loop systems? So again, not a lawyer. If you've got human in the loop, um, and you are still using AI as part of that system, then you would probably still be covered by the same legislative requirements. If you are building something high risk and you have a human in the loop, it might be that that is adequate human oversight for the human oversight requirements of of high risk systems. But you would have to assess that based on your risk assessment of the platform. So I wouldn't expect that just because you are using humans and AI that you are not obliged to follow the act. But yeah, okay, confirm that's the question you were getting at. Yeah, you if you're building a high risk system, you have an obligation to provide human oversight. With a human in the loop system, that oversight might be the thing you're already doing. Any more for any more? Okay, I think that's everything. In which case, thanks for your time and attention today. We will be in touch with a copy of the white paper and this recording. And if we can help you with any of those obligations, or you have questions that weren't answered on the call today, so long as they're not actual legal questions, in which case I will refer you to your lawyer, then yeah, glad to hear from you. So thanks again.